There's a phase in transformation that almost no one recognizes while it's happening. It doesn't look like progress. It doesn't feel like growth. In fact, it often feels like the opposite, like confusion, like instability, like you're losing your grip on who you thought you were. But if you understand what's really happening, you'll realize this isn't breakdown, it's breakthrough beginning. Because right before a quantum leap in your life, something has to happen first. The old version of you has to dissolve, not disappear overnight, not vanish in some dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, systematically lose its grip on your reality. The habits that once felt automatic start feeling forced. The reactions that once came naturally start feeling strange. The motivations that once drove you start feeling empty. And this can be terrifying if you don't know what it means. Because we've been taught to see identity as something solid, something fixed. We think we are who we are, and that's just how it is. But identity isn't solid. It's a pattern, a collection of repeated thoughts, emotions, reactions, and behaviors that have become so automatic, you mistake them for truth. And when that pattern starts to dissolve, when the old programming starts to break down, it feels like you're losing yourself. But you're not. You're just making space for who you're becoming. Here's what most people don't understand about why their life stays the same year after year. It's not because they're unlucky. It's not because the universe is against them. It's because their personality keeps recreating the same reality. Your personality is just a set of memorized reactions. The way you respond to stress, the way you interpret rejection, the way you handle success, the thoughts you think when you wake up, the emotions you feel in familiar situations. These patterns become so automatic that you don't even notice them anymore. They're just who you are, and every time you repeat them, you reinforce them. The neural pathways in your brain get stronger, the emotional responses get faster, the behaviors become more ingrained. And here's why this matters. These patterns create a signal, an energetic signature that broadcasts out from you into the world around you. It affects how you make decisions, how other people respond to you, what opportunities you notice, what possibilities you can even perceive. Your personality is literally keeping your current reality stable. It's a stabilizing force that ensures tomorrow looks a lot like today, that next month looks a lot like last month, that next year looks a lot like this year. This is why positive thinking alone doesn't work. This is why affirmations often fail. This is why you can set goals and visualize and take action and still end up in the same place, because underneath all of that, your personality is still running the same program, still broadcasting the same signal, still collapsing the same reality. If you want a quantum leap, if you want something fundamentally different to happen in your life, the personality has to change. Not just your thoughts, not just your behaviors. The entire pattern of who you are has to reorganize at a deeper level. And that reorganization always begins with dissolution, with the old version starting to fall apart. When your old identity starts dissolving, it doesn't announce itself clearly. There's no voice in your head that says your personality is changing now. Instead, you just start noticing things feel different. Goals that used to excite you suddenly feel meaningless. Conversations that used to engage you now feel draining. People who used to trigger strong emotions in you now feel neutral. Even your fears might start to soften, like they're losing their power over you. At first, this can feel like depression, like you're losing your motivation or your passion or your drive. But it's not that. It's that your emotional investment in the old pattern is weakening. You might also notice that you're less reactive. Situations that would have sent you spiraling now just feel like information. Problems that would have consumed your thoughts for days now pass through without sticking. Even successes that would have thrilled you now feel strangely flat. This emotional leveling isn't numbness, it's neutrality. And neutrality is necessary for change. Because as long as you're emotionally charged about everything, you're locked into the old pattern. You're reinforcing the same neural circuits, triggering the same chemical responses, broadcasting the same signal. But when the charge starts to drain, when things start to feel neutral, That's your nervous system letting go of the old programming. It's no longer automatically firing the same reactions. It's creating space for something new. You might also feel a strange sense of detachment, like you're watching your life from a slight distance instead of being fully immersed in it. This can feel disconnecting, like you're not fully present, but what's actually happening is observer shift. You're starting to witness your thoughts and emotions instead of identifying with them completely. You're beginning to see the patterns instead of being the patterns, and that shift in perspective is the first step toward conscious change. The reason this dissolution phase feels so uncomfortable is because your brain is designed to preserve stability. It likes predictable patterns because they require less energy. When you react the same way every day, your brain can run those reactions on autopilot. But when those patterns start breaking down, when the old circuits stop firing automatically, your brain enters unfamiliar territory. It doesn't know what to do. It can't predict what's going to happen. And that uncertainty triggers alarm. Your nervous system might try to pull you back. Old habits might suddenly resurface even though you thought you'd moved past them. Familiar doubts might come flooding back. You might find yourself reverting to behaviors you were sure you'd outgrown. This isn't failure. This is your brain trying to restore the familiar pattern because familiar equals safe to your nervous system, even if familiar was painful. But if you can recognize this resistance for what it is, if you can see it as the old program trying to reinstall itself, you can choose differently. You can let the old pattern finish dissolving instead of rushing to rebuild it. And here's what happens when you do that. The old identity loses its grip completely. The neural pathways supporting the old reactions start to weaken. The emotional patterns start to fade. The automatic thoughts start to quiet. And in that space, something new can form. New neural connections, new emotional responses, new ways of seeing yourself and the world, a new identity that can access possibilities the old version of you could never perceive. Here's where this gets really interesting. In the quantum world, the observer affects what's being observed. The act of observation itself influences what becomes real. And if that's true at the quantum level, it has massive implications for consciousness. Because you are the observer of your life, and the lens through which you observe your identity, your beliefs, your expectations, your emotional patterns, that lens determines what possibilities you can collapse into reality. When your identity is locked into a certain pattern, you can only see and experience the possibilities that match that pattern. Your brain filters out everything else. You literally cannot perceive opportunities that don't fit your current sense of self. But when identity starts to shift, when the observer begins to change, the field of possibilities changes with it. Things you couldn't see before suddenly become visible. Options that seemed impossible suddenly feel accessible. Paths that were closed suddenly open. This is why people often experience strange synchronicities during periods of deep transformation. New people appear who reflect where you're heading. Conversations happen that introduce exactly the ideas you need. Opportunities emerge that perfectly match your new direction. These aren't accidents. These are the natural result of the observer changing. When you're no longer collapsing the same version of reality, different versions become available. But this doesn't happen while the old identity is still dominant. It happens after the old identity dissolves enough to stop controlling the signal. After the pattern has broken down enough that new patterns can form. That's why the dissolution phase, as uncomfortable as it is absolutely necessary. You can't quantum leap while still being the same person. The old self has to dissolve so the new self can emerge. And with that new self comes a new reality. There's a particular phase in this process that's especially challenging. It's the phase where the old identity has weakened, but the new one hasn't fully formed yet. You're in between, not who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. This in-between state can feel like being lost. You don't have the old reference points anymore. The things that used to guide your decisions don't work. The motivations that used to drive you have faded. Even your sense of purpose might feel unclear, but this isn't being lost. This is reorganization. Your entire system is recalibrating. Your brain is forming new neural pathways. Your nervous system is learning new responses. Your consciousness is expanding into new possibilities. The discomfort you feel in this phase is actually a sign that real change is happening, because if you felt completely comfortable, you'd still be in the old pattern. Comfort comes from familiarity, and you're no longer in familiar territory. What you're experiencing is what happens when a system moves from one stable state to another. There's always a transitional phase where neither state is fully active, where the old has weakened but the new hasn't stabilized. And the key in this phase is not to panic and try to recreate the old stability, not to force yourself back into the familiar pattern just because uncertainty is uncomfortable, but to stay present with the discomfort, to allow the reorganization to complete. Because if you can stay steady through this transition, if you can tolerate the uncertainty without contracting back into the old pattern, something powerful happens. The new identity starts to stabilize. There comes a point where the new patterns have fired enough times that they start to feel natural, where the new reactions come automatically, where the new way of seeing yourself and the world no longer feels like something you're trying to do, but just who you are. This is when the new identity locks in. And when it does, you'll notice something remarkable. You'll look back at who you were 6 months ago, a year ago, and that version of yourself will feel like a stranger. Not because you rejected your past, not because you're better than you were, but because the pattern that defined that version of you no longer exists in the same form. The neural circuits have changed. The emotional responses have changed. The lens through which you observe reality has changed. And when the observer changes completely, reality has no choice but to reflect that change. This is when the quantum leap becomes visible. Not when you first start changing, not during the dissolution phase, but after the new identity has stabilized enough to broadcast a consistent signal. Opportunities appear that match who you've become. People respond to you differently because your energy has changed. Decisions feel clear because you're making them from a different baseline. Even challenges feel manageable because you're approaching them from a different state. The external changes often feel surprisingly natural. Not like miracles falling from the sky, but like things finally clicking into place. Like the path was always there, you just couldn't see it until you became someone who could. And this is the beautiful thing about quantum leaps. They don't happen to you, they happen through you. Through the change in who you are. Through the dissolution of the old identity and the emergence of the new one. Right before a quantum leap fully manifests, there's often a period of unusual calm. After all the dissolution, after all the uncertainty, after all the reorganization, things settle into a new baseline. You're no longer anxious about outcomes. You're no longer checking constantly for signs of progress. You're no longer emotionally charged about whether things will work out. You just feel steady, grounded, clear. This calm isn't complacency, it's coherence. Your nervous system has regulated, your identity has stabilized, your signal has become consistent, and that consistency is what allows reality to lock in the new pattern. People often misinterpret this calm as lack of motivation. They think something's wrong because they're not feeling intense emotions anymore. But intensity isn't power. Intensity is often just dysregulation. Real power is calm, steady, grounded. When you reach this state, when the new identity feels completely natural, and you're no longer trying to be different, but simply being different, that's when the external world catches up. Not always instantly. Physical reality reorganizes through layers, through sequences of events, through time, but inevitably, because the signal has changed. And when the signal changes, what shows up must change too. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in these words, if you've been feeling this dissolution, this uncertainty, this strange in-between state, pay attention. You're not broken, you're not failing, you're not regressing, you're in the most important phase of transformation. The phase where the old you is dissolving to make room for the new you. And the quantum leap you've been sensing, the change you've been working toward, it's not distant, it's already beginning. It started the moment your old identity began to weaken. It's continuing as your new identity forms, and it will complete when that new identity stabilizes enough to broadcast a consistent signal. Your job right now isn't to force the process, isn't to try to speed it up or control how it unfolds. Your job is to stay present with what's happening, to allow the old patterns to dissolve without trying to rebuild them out of fear, to let the new patterns strengthen without rushing them. Because this process has its own intelligence. Your nervous system knows how to reorganize. Your brain knows how to form new pathways. Your consciousness knows how to expand into new possibilities. You don't have to micromanage it. You just have to not interfere with it. So if everything feels uncertain right now, if the old motivations have faded and the new ones haven't fully formed yet, if you're feeling like you don't quite know who you are anymore, trust it. This is exactly what happens right before a quantum leap. The old self is dissolving, the new self is emerging. And when that emergence completes, when the new identity locks in fully, you won't just experience a new reality. You'll be someone who naturally lives in that reality. Someone for whom it's not a goal or a dream or a hope, but simply who they are and how they exist. That's the quantum leap. Not getting something new, but becoming someone new. And everything that comes with that. You're closer than you think. The dissolution you're feeling isn't the end. It's the beginning of everything you've been moving toward. Stay with it, trust it, and let it complete. Because the version of you on the other side of this transformation won't recognize the person you used to be. And that's exactly how you'll know the leap is complete.